All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are digging into a discovery on Oak Island that could be a massive breakthrough in this centuries-old treasure hunt. And you know what? It all kicks off with one single, enormous stone.
So let's start with a number. 40,000 pounds. Just let that sink in. That's the estimated weight of this one giant boulder they found over on Lot 8. I mean, we're talking about a rock so big they needed some serious heavy machinery just to budget.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just some random boulder that nature dropped there. Nope. The team found it sitting almost perfectly on this man-made ring of smaller stones. And that, of course, immediately begs the question, why? Why on earth would someone go to all that trouble placing a 20-ton rock on a handmade pedestal? So, first things first, they had to move the thing. That was challenge number one. But what they found underneath it, well, that's what really kicked off a whole new chapter in this epic search for answers. You see, when they finally got it out of the way, they weren't looking at natural ground. It was pretty obvious this was a filled-in hole, a clear, unmistakable sign that the ground here had been disturbed, that something was intentionally buried. And that huge boulder, it was basically acting as a giant 40,000-pound capstone.
Okay, so you've got this backfilled shaft. The next logical question is, what's in the soil? And to figure that out, the team had to switch gears, moving from heavy machinery to some pretty high-tech science.
They brought in geoscientist Dr. Ian Spooner, and he had this cool piece of tech, a handheld XRF scanner. Basically, you point it at the dirt and it tells you what elements are in there, right on the spot. And almost immediately, it gave them two very different and, well, let's just say very exciting results. And this is where it gets really interesting. The results were a real contrast. On one hand, you've got silver. I mean, come on, that's the classic signature of buried treasure, right? But then they also found really high levels of lead. And that pointed to a totally different kind of clue. Not about what was buried, but maybe about how it was buried.
Yeah, that high lead content, it's a key indicator of an ancient and pretty advanced mining technique called fire setting. The idea is, centuries ago, miners would light these huge fires underground. The intense heat would fracture the rock, making it way easier to dig out shafts and tunnels. Finding evidence of that means we're not talking about a simple hole in the ground. This was a sophisticated operation.
So they kept digging, and as they got past that top layer of soil, the clues changed. They went from chemical traces to something physical. They uncovered an incredible, honest-to-goodness, man-made construction. And here it is. What they found was this carefully constructed circular feature made of stones, just packed in there with real purpose. You can just tell this is not a random pile of rocks. This was a deliberate, layered structure intentionally hidden beneath all that soil and that giant boulder.
And the uniqueness of this find, it was just staggering. Even the on-site archaeologist, Fiona Steele, and look, this is someone who knows the history of this area inside and out. She said she'd never seen anything like it. Not just on Oak Island, but in all of Nova Scotia, period.
So the experts on site, they were all in agreement, unanimous. This thing was 100% man-made. It was built with a highly intentional design, and it would have taken an extraordinary amount of effort. And here's the kicker. They believe it predates the 1700s. That places it well before the original money pit discovery was even a thing.
Team member Rick Lagina, I think, really summed it up perfectly. You just don't go to this much trouble moving a 20-ton boulder, building this complex stone structure, unless you are protecting or at least marking something of immense value.
So that's the next huge question, right? Who could have possibly built this thing? And the style, the sheer scale of the construction, it led the experts to a pretty bold and, potentially history-changing theory.
Archaeologist Laird Niven, he came right out and argued that what they're looking at is a European megalithic construction. Now, what that means is a large-scale structure built with massive stones by Europeans. And this theory, it's huge because it suggests the technology needed to do this points away from the local builders of the time, and that could fundamentally challenge the accepted timeline of when Europeans were active in North America.
His thinking goes like this. moving a boulder that big isn't just about muscle. It requires a pretty specific knowledge of physics and geometry. Levers, counterweights, complex planning. And that was much more characteristic of European engineering of that time. Plus, they would have had the large-scale manpower to actually pull it off. And this European theory, it really starts to connect the dots with other finds on the island. Just think about the evidence we've seen. There's that 14th century Portuguese coin found near the money pit. Then there's that potential 500-year-old Portuguese stone road in the swamp. And now you add this pre-1700 structure to the mix. Suddenly, you're looking at a possible timeline of some pretty significant European activity happening centuries before anyone thought the island was officially settled.
Okay, so all of this is building to what might be the single most important part of this discovery, maybe in the entire history of the Oak Island search.
And here's why. It's so significant because the famous money pit, well, it's a mess. It's been dug up, flooded, even dynamited for over 200 years. It's a completely contaminated site. But this spot on Lot 8, there is absolutely no record of any previous searcher ever touching it. It seems to be completely pristine.
And as Marty Lagina pointed out, that means his team are the very first people to investigate this site using modern scientific methods. They're not just cleaning up someone else's mess from 100 years ago, they are looking at an untouched historical site for the very first time.
So you have to ask the ultimate question, right? Could this untampered site, ancient, complex, and maybe even European in design, could this be the thing that holds the real key to the entire Oak Island mystery?
Right now, the team is moving forward with a very slow, very careful archaeological dig. What they find next could rewrite everything, not just the story of Oak Island, but a pretty significant piece of North American history. So the only real question left is, what lies just a few feet deeper?